Welcome to the AAAi podcast. I'm Bridget McCormick, the CEO and president of the American Arbitration Association.
And I'm Zach Abramowitz, founder of Killer Whale Strategies and investor in disruptive legal startups. The AAAi podcast tells the story of the American Arbitration Association's AI journey. We discuss emerging trends in artificial intelligence with movers and shakers inside AAA, as well as with key influencers in the broader legal AI ecosystem.
So we for sure want to talk with you about lawyers, and AI. But like for those who don't know you, because I'm sure there are some people in legal, can you tell us a little bit about your quite dynamic career trajectory?
Sure. I'll give you the abridged version. I practiced law for a number of years first before going into writing and podcasting. I clerked on the Ninth Circuit. I worked at Wachtell Lipton, New York, and I worked as a federal prosecutor in New Jersey. And then after that, I moved into the world of media. First, I had a blog that I did under a pseudonym while still in the U.S. Attorney's Office called Underneath Their Robes. It was essentially a humor and gossip blog about federal judges. Then I founded Above the Law, the legal news website, in 2006. I was there from 2006 until 2019. And then since 2020, I have had a newsletter on the Substack platform, which is a subscription-based platform called Original Jurisdiction, where I continue to write about law and legal affairs. And I also write for various other publications. I write a column every other week for Bloomberg Law. I do work for the Times and the Post and the Journal and other places on a somewhat sporadic basis, but that's what I am. So I'm basically
you're also the author of you're also the author of a book.
Yes, although it's been a while. A novel from 2014 called Supreme Ambitions. It's a novel also set in the world of the judiciary. I describe it as the Devil Wears Prada meets the federal judiciary. It's about a young woman who is just entering the legal profession and who is taken under the wing of a mentor, and both women have their own ambitions to clerk for the Supreme Court and to sit on the Supreme Court, respectively. And so that's been fun. I've been meaning to write a sequel for it, but I have to say I've been a little delinquent on that.
There's time. It's great to see you, David. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I feel like I've been following David Lat for, a decade and a half to figure out what's happening with the cool kids in legal and just with legal generally. So it's for us who Zach and I have been working a lot on AI. It's fun for us to get to talk to you about what's happening. What do you think of yourself though professionally? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a lawyer? Are you a writer? Are you a podcaster? Are you all of those? None of those? Something else together? Like how do you when you introduce yourself? What do you say?
I generally say I'm a writer or a journalist, but I definitely think of myself as an entrepreneur as well. I think it took me a little while to get there because I think for a long time I thought of myself, in many ways as a lawyer, but now I really am my own business person. On Substack, you have to get subscribers. That's how you generate revenue. I also have sponsors, and so I have to do a lot of the business side things that when I was at Above the Law, I had colleagues to do. And it's been fun, actually. I enjoy learning about the business side of things and figuring out how to make a living as well as how to make content.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's like always struck me about your writing, whether it was in your novel or on Above the Law, or like for the real OGs, Underneath Their Robes. But what do you think about, like, why are you so able to connect with lawyers? Like, how do you figure out what it is that lawyers actually care about?
So that's a great question. I think a lot of it is just from consuming a lot of work about lawyers. I read a ton. And I try to just talk to a lot of people, whether it's at conferences, I've been to a whole bunch in the past few weeks, or whether it's texting, group texting with people. I'm a member of a couple of those, or social media. A lot of it is really just trying to figure out what are people talking about. When I was at Above the Law, we really aimed to figure out what are people talking about? What are people actually interested in? Unlike editors at so-called traditional mainstream media publications, we weren't telling the readers, you should be interested in X or you should care about Y. We wanted to find out, what do you care about? What are you interested in? And then we'll write about it.
You know, it's interesting because like you've moved in like from as a content person. Above the Law was obviously, you know, a kind of publisher brand, but you've now moved, even though I know, you know, it's original jurisdiction, it also has a name, but you've moved kind of like back to a personal brand, which is kind of where content is going. Like you've always been ahead of content. I think it's like one of the things that's made your career like really unique is, you know, you just being like paying attention, like, okay, blogs are a thing. You can do that now, and podcasts or newsletters. So obviously, you know, Bridget and I pay a lot of attention as content creators ourselves to like, you know, the kind of the most important content formats, you know, both generally and for lawyers. Like, how do you think you've stayed ahead, and like what do you see like coming down like the pipeline, like with other content formats, and like where are you starting to think about like where you're going to go next with your content?
So there are a couple of things I want to comment on, Zach. I think first, you're totally right about personal brands. I think it is now much more about an individual creator as opposed to an institutional brand. And that's true not just in terms of what I do, legal media. It's true in media generally. Now you have star reporters who are working for the Times or the Post, but when they move from the Post to the Times or the Times to the Post, their readers move with them, and they have a brand and a credibility that's independent of the publication. You see it in the world of law firms. It's no longer a matter of, oh, I work for Cravath or I work for Sullivan and Cromwell. When lawyers leave, like Scott Barchet left Cravath for Paul Weiss back in 2016 or so, clients followed. So in some ways, it's interesting. I think many times there's this narrative of, oh, power just keeps on getting consolidated in the hands of big, powerful institutions, whether it's Cravath or the New York Times. But in some ways, there's been a devolution, or there's been a transfer of power or influence to individuals, whether it's individual lawyers or whether it's individual writers or podcasters. So I think that is in many ways a good thing. I also would say that when I talk about my career and people ask me, what do you say is a critical factor? Honestly, I say luck. I think that there's definitely a first mover advantage, and sometimes that's just luck when you decide to do something before a lot of other people are doing it. So Underneath Their Robes and Above the Law were some of the earliest blogs, and there were a lot of other sites that came along later that I think were just as good or better in terms of content, but we were earlier, and I think that was definitely an advantage. And then in terms of moving into Substack, I think I was one of the first US-based lawyers, at least, who now, you know, to be on the platform. There are now many others who came after me, and I could tick off lots of them, Steve Lat, Chris Geidner, and many others. But I do think there was an advantage.
We recently interviewed Adam Unikowski,
Yep,
who's an
who's on
appellate
there
partner at Jenner Block and also has a fantastic,
Yep.
fantastic newsletter. So it is we're starting to see quite a bit more of. Do you have any idea like what's next, or you'll just kind of like know it when you see it?
Probably, as Justice Stewart famously said about adult content, I guess I'll know it when I see it. One thing that was new, or the newest thing for me, and of course you and Bridget have been doing it for a while, is podcasting. I only started my podcast in 2022, so that was 2 years into my being on Substack. And so podcasting has been around way longer. So I'm a little bit new or new-ish to it, but still, there are maybe not as many podcasts in legal as they are in some other sectors. And so I still think that there is fertile ground here for all of us.
I haven't really seen a legal channel take off on TikTok, David. So maybe you and I should we should figure out a little TikTok legal business plan. But that's for a later conversation. I doubt that when you keep succeeding the way you have across different content platforms, it's luck. But it is better to be lucky than good. So we can we can agree about that, but I don't think it's luck. So let's turn the conversation to AI a little bit. As you know, Zach and I spend a lot of time talking, thinking, building with AI. And I think it's safe to say we're both kind of obsessed with it. When I find something that's, you know, I can't think of anyone else to send it to that I just read, but my brain won't shut down, I send it to Zach no matter what time of the day. And I know if he hasn't read it already, he will. So we're paying a lot of attention to how the legal industry is greeting what I think is going to be the biggest disruption to the business of law and the practice of law that we've seen in my career as a lawyer. I'm also at the AAA, of course, focusing on the dispute resolution. I call it the operating system disruption, and I'm literally thrilled and excited about what I think it's going to enable us to do. I think there are just millions of disputes that right now go unresolved, and we'll be able to resolve them. And I think that's actually just going to be a tremendous gift to families, communities, governments, you name it. But again, this is about you. And so we want to know what you're hearing kind of from the lawyers, who I feel like you're in touch with more than anybody else. Are they paying as much attention to it as I think they are? I mean, are there some that are paying more attention than others? And what are their priorities? We'll have a bunch of follow-up questions, but why don't I take a beat and hear what you have to say about that?
So I think that some are definitely paying more attention than others. And I would say one thing is the lawyers who don't bill by the hour are paying more attention than the ones who do, in the sense that if you don't bill by the hour, if you bill on a project basis or you bill with a flat fee or something like that, you need to be efficient. And so tools like AI, which enable you to become much more efficient and to complete things much more quickly, are very attractive to you. Whereas if you bill by the hour, you don't mind taking a little bit of time to do a particular project. I think that that is one thing I've noticed. A second factor I've noticed is I will say that lawyers who work for large law firms, AKA big law, I think they have been less focused on exploring all the possibilities of AI, partly because some of the work that they do is very complicated and involves a lot of moving parts. And even if you can have AI tackle discrete parts of that, for example, I talked to one partner at Cleary who says AI tools are doing a better job than junior associates at due diligence. It's hard to basically have AI do the entire thing. You need humans to apply the AI to particular tasks in this complex multi-billion-dollar transaction. You can't just tell the AI engine or platform do the whole thing. And so they're somewhat insulated for now in terms of having their work done entirely by AI and therefore replaced by AI. But I think they need to pay attention to it, because one thing I've also noticed, and perhaps this is a confidence or an arrogance, is I've interviewed some large firm lawyers who kind of look at AI with a kind of snobbery, saying, oh, well, we don't use AI for our work. It's too complex, it's too bespoke, and things of that nature. And maybe that's true for now, but I don't know if it will always be true. And so I think lawyers who are innovative and on top of the ball need to be exploring how this technology can help them serve their clients better. Because again, like I said, ChatGPT is not going to be writing your Supreme Court brief or doing your $10 billion merger today, but who knows what future tools might be able to do in years to come.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, David, because there are some lawyers we have found like paying attention to it, but I still think that again within the lawyers, like not the innovation attorneys, not the knowledge management attorneys, not even the chief innovation officer at a law firm. With the lawyers, I think it is still the minority, but it is interesting to note like who some of like the exceptions are. We mentioned Adam Unikowski before. There you're talking about someone who argues cases in front of the Supreme Court, writing articles about how he thinks that AI just out of the box is basically a better Supreme Court clerk than humans. I think it's also, if you look at like, John Quinn, we mentioned, lawyers, the podcasts, John Quinn has a podcast, Law Disrupted. And I happened to have been going through it yesterday, noticing, wow, like a lot of his conversations at the moment are focused on AI, but it does also feel to me, and I'm curious if you get the sense as well, that with some firms and some lawyers, like we're kind of seeing like a K-shape form where you've got certain firms that I think are getting very, very quickly ahead, but maybe we haven't heard about it because they're being, a little bit tight-lipped, and other firms that are just ignoring this and kind of like hoping for the best.
Yeah, I think that there are some law firms that are definitely like the proverbial ostrich burying their heads in the sand. And I don't think that smart. So, it's interesting. I think one thing I'll say that's unfortunate is lawyers as a whole can be somewhat risk averse, not necessarily the folks that you're talking to in the innovation space, but just lawyers generally. And they read something in the news like the lawyers who filed a ChatGPT written brief in the Southern District of New York and didn't check the cases themselves. And it turned out the cases were hallucinated, and it turned out they got in trouble. And so a lot of lawyers will read that and they'll say, oh my goodness, if I use ChatGPT, I'm going to get in trouble and get sanctioned. And that's not true. ChatGPT doesn't engage in these screw-ups. Humans using ChatGPT improperly engage in these screw-ups. And so I think it had a chilling effect, though. And then another thing that I think is problematic that I wrote about in my Bloomberg Law column is courts have started issuing all these AI-related rules requiring disclosure of when you've used an AI tool and things of that nature, or certifications that you've used an AI tool in a certain way. And look, on the one hand, I think it's great that judges are trying to stay on top of technology because it's all too often that judges are behind the curve. But here, I think they're starting to make rules, A, before we fully know the contours of the technology, and B, they're making rules on an individual ad hoc basis. So in the same court, one judge might have one set of AI rules and another judge might have another. And practicing lawyers who are litigating across multiple courts in front of multiple judges now have to check each time, oh, well, what does this judge want us to do with AI? So I think, A, it's a burden on practicing lawyers, but B, it also creates this kind of fear because they think, wow, judges are making me disclose AI. Is there something problematic about it? Is there something nefarious about it? And so I think that we need to encourage lawyers to be more open to the innovation rather than to tell them this is some kind of dangerous product handled with care.
I'm guessing Bridget has some thoughts about this.
I have thoughts. I mean, first of all, I'm still mad at that one Southern District of New York lawyer because I feel like he set the whole profession back by 2 years. I'm literally so mad at that dude. And the court orders are insane. I mean, there's sometimes the same court, reverses itself 2 months later, and it's hard enough to keep up with the individual rules across courthouses, across courtrooms, about so many other things that now keeping track of this, I agree, it's really going to make it complicated for practitioners who need to, be able to resolve disputes efficiently. I feel like courts it's not a fair fight for them. They have public funding. They rarely have, engineers who are building and know how to use the technology effectively to improve their service. They're elected often, at least in state courts, right? I mean, there's, so it's not a fair fight with courts. But okay, putting that aside, are you seeing like business models that are already across any law firms that are taking into account what, the differences this technology might make over the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And are you seeing law firms that are thinking hard about what the technology means for their hiring practices? And the stickiest wicket for me is lawyer formation. Like, how are lawyers going to be trained when in fact this technology can do what first, second, third, fourth, I think Adam Unikowski would say fifth, sixth, and seventh year lawyers can do? What is that going to look like? What is lawyer formation going to look like in big law? It's looked like one thing for a very long time, right, David? I mean, you know what it looks like. Do you know any law firms that you think are thinking about? You don't have to name names. Thinking about these things, and any insights into that?
Yeah, so no, there are definitely a ton of law firms that are thinking about it. And one thing I will mention, kind of going to your point about hiring, is law firms I've spoken with, or lawyers I've spoken with, are more open to playing around with AI when it comes to their internal processes and management, as opposed to client matters. So, for example, you mentioned hiring and recruiting. For example, full disclosure, they're a sponsor of mine, but Lateral Link, they have a tool called Haystack, HAISTACK, which is designed to help law firms go through large numbers of profiles of potential lawyers or employees and kind of surface the ones that are most promising. And that seems like a very good use case. I took a 2-year detour into legal recruiting between Above the Law and original jurisdiction, and you get hundreds of resumes, and you just sifting through these resumes to do a first cut can be very time consuming. And so a tool like Haystack could potentially revolutionize that process. Now, look, humans still need to interview these people. Humans still need to look at the resumes and make the finer distinctions. But if you have 100 resumes, there are probably 10 of those that most people reviewing those resumes would say, given the requirements of the position, are the most promising. And you don't need to have all these humans reviewing all these resumes. Another thing I will say about why lawyers are more open to applying AI to their internal processes, whether it's managing their precedents or templates like knowledge management, whether it's recruiting, is some of the problems with adoption of AI in legal are coming from clients, because some clients have the problem you alluded to, thanks to those SDNY lawyers of, I'm scared of AI. My GC or CLO is scared of AI. Maybe my CEO is scared of AI. And so one provision that is now becoming routine in retention or engagement letters is a statement about the party's expectations of AI. Some clients, who are the forward-thinking ones, say, please use AI on my matters. I'm using AI in my in-house stuff, and we're making things 20% more efficient. And in fact, those clients are saying, why is my bill to outside counsel not 20% lower? But then there are other in-house legal departments that are scared, and they will put in that engagement letter, please do not let AI touch any aspect of our case. And so clients are also a big part of this, as you would expect in a client service business like law.
So first of all, I have to comment on the Haystack example that you mentioned from Lateral Link, because I think that's so smart. And one of the pieces of advice I'll often give to a law firm is, we tend to think about AI, and then the first thought is like, okay, but does that mean that our lawyers' billable hours are now going to be erased? And to me, it's like there's so many exit ramps before you get to sensitive client work, where, let's face it, you've got a trained, Yale or Harvard law attorney who's going to be very effective at doing and completing those tasks. They might actually be better at some things than AI is right now. But when you talk about like what AI is being used for law firms to maybe increase realization rates or find better recruits, which are, find better lateral partners, this is like really critical to the business of a law firm right now. And the AI that they're probably using there is nothing. So there's very low risk. The status quo is not to use any kind of advanced tools. So to me, I think that's, that's a really smart point. And just, we was just discussing this with Bridget, before we had you on, is there is, to me, so much misinformation about like the security and the data risks when it comes to AI, that I think there's going to be a lot of people who are like not deleting their Facebook posts, but like deleting their AI policies that they had in place. Because I think a year or two from now, when all the dust settles, people are going to realize like this was like way too much, not just being way too risk averse. So I couldn't, I love the Haystack example. One of the other things that like we've been following at the AAA is the rise in disputes. And this sort of goes to the point that you were making before, about AI and being more efficient. Well, when you get more efficient, it doesn't mean necessarily your job is gone. Like now there's more work to be done. So, one of the things that we've been forecasting is the fact that AI is going to reduce the costs of filing a claim. There's already, instances of people fighting and winning against big banks just using ChatGPT to generate their documents. There's companies like EvenUp that are now making it really easy for personal injury attorneys to file demand letters and to draft those demand letters. So all of this feels like it's going to, lead to a rise in disputes. Are you hearing from lawyers who are starting to forecast that as well, thinking in terms of like, well, AI might actually lead to a lot, higher case volume?
Well, I think this goes to something that I know you and Bridget have talked about before, which is access to justice and the high cost of legal services. There are a lot of claims that I think never get filed or prosecuted because it's too expensive to bring them. Somebody can't afford to hire a lawyer. Lawyers are very expensive. Maybe this particular plaintiff's side contingency fee lawyer has too many other matters on their plate already. But if there are AI tools that allow self-represented or pro se litigants to handle their own matters, that could really be a revolution. One thing that, again, I know that you've discussed before that's crucial to this, though, is regulation. Because if we are going to see the full benefits of AI, especially when it comes to addressing access to justice and allowing middle class or underprivileged folks to use AI to help themselves in terms of their legal matters, we need to make sure that the regulatory frameworks are reflecting that, because some of this might be unauthorized practice of law, for example. Or maybe there are a lot of technology companies that could invest in legal products, but is there fee splitting between lawyers and non-lawyers? There's a lot going on here, and I am hopeful that regulators will allow some of this exploration to take place, but I'm also nervous because A, the regulators, who are lawyers generally by training themselves, are also risk averse, and B, there is a cartel aspect to this. There is this aspect of, are these tools going to threaten our income? Maybe not, or are these companies that are going to come into this space going to threaten our income? And so I think that there is a concern. And one other thing I'll just mention is one thing you saw with rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft is that's something people use all the time. And so there was pressure on city mayors and city councils. Hey, my friend in this other city has this great thing called Uber or Lyft. Why can't we bring it to this town or city? And so there was pressure on the regulators because consumers demanded it. People hopefully need lawyers only episodically. Hopefully you're not, going to a lawyer, every week or every day like you might for Uber or Lyft. And so people will say, okay, that experience of using a lawyer for my divorce or my home closing or my lawsuit, it wasn't great and it was too expensive and it was a big pain, but hopefully that won't happen again for years. And so they think, I don't really need to kind of pressure any regulator to loosen up the restrictions or anything like that. So how do you get consumers to say, hey, there is this whole revolution taking place in all these other sectors, and it needs to come to legal too?
That's interesting. I really hadn't thought about I've been assuming that this disruption is coming for legal. I know legal's been unbelievably effective for the past couple hundred years in avoiding every single disruption that's come for every other industry, but I feel like the jig might be up this time. But you're right, it's not perfectly analogous to the rideshare transition or streaming. I keep talking about our legacy services as you're gonna be able to keep getting your DVDs delivered to your house for a little while, but get ready because we're going to be streaming dispute resolution services in a couple of years. And I do believe that, but I think you make a pretty good point about the ways in which they're disanalogous. I don't know if that's an actual word, but I like to make words up anyway. So there we go. I wonder though if you see among the lawyers that you are most in touch with, or the firms you're most in touch with, do you see any leaders in addressing the regulatory barriers? Because I agree with you, the regulatory barriers are serious, and we've been watching. I think of it as like a Jenga tower, and there's like blocks being pulled out in different states, or some state Supreme Courts that have set up regulatory sandboxes even before AI. There are some litigation, like the Upsolve litigation, that's pulled another block out of the Jenga tower. There are new regulatory sandboxes. I know Minnesota has one around generative AI. And then, there's a clamoring public who, once they learn that there might be an easier way to get to legal information that could help, make a difference in their affairs. That's another pressure. But I will tell you, when I present on this topic to legal audiences, I will always have somebody, usually one of the people who hasn't even tried any of the tools, raise their hand and say, why isn't all of this the unauthorized practice of law? And why doesn't that just shut down this conversation and you never need to present about this again? And my instinct is like, that's not going to work this time, but I don't know. Do you see any leaders in the regulatory reform space in big law? Or maybe not in other aspects of it or other areas of the profession?
Yeah, in big law, not really.
Yeah,
I
me
think that
neither.
there are some people in knowledge management or legal operations who are within the big law framework who are exploring these issues. But I can't say that there's been any kind of chair or managing partner or very prominent practicing lawyer that has really kind of taken up this banner, I think. I mean, look, I
Yeah,
think there are definitely firms out there that are interested in touting how they are developing, say, AI tools. I mentioned Cleary, for example. They have Cleary X, which is the tool they're
yeah.
using for example, their document review, their due diligence. And I know that their managing partner has been sort of talking about these issues, but it's not really a focus yet, I would say. Maybe it will become one. But it's interesting that I think we might see AI, or we're already seeing AI, perhaps make a difference in terms of more consumer-facing stuff where there is this kind of repeat encounter issue, whether it's traffic violations or parking tickets or things like that, where there is this volume and where it's not just something that you need every couple of years. Whereas these large firms, where they work on these mergers or acquisitions that might be a transformative event for a company, but it may be the last event in the existence of that company because now it's going to be part of some other company. They're not having these repeated transactions or matters where it lends itself well to being handled by AI yet, even if discrete pieces can be.
Yeah, I mean, that's right for bet the company disputes and also for, large M&A deals. But even, all of those companies have some repetitive disputes, right? They have employment disputes and, there are, depending on the industry, like payer provider disputes that are repetitive and lend themselves really well, I think, to and a generative AI dispute resolution process that would be a lot faster and less expensive for the clients. It does disrupt the business model if you're billing hourly. But I feel like given the reduced barrier to entry to solutions, as well as filing complaints, lawyers should see some blue sky out there. I hope they see some blue sky out there.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I would mention is take these arbitration clauses that require consumers to arbitrate matters. I think sometimes there's been this suspicion because people think, well, this process is controlled by the company, and the company is going to have a disproportionate effect over selecting the arbitrators and what they're going to review, et cetera, et cetera. If there was some outside organization like a AAA or what have you that said, okay, here is our trusted AI-driven dispute resolver, and it's not controlled by a company. If I'm a consumer deciding whether to agree to an arbitration clause, if the arbitration is going to be handled by an AI tool, by a reputable third party, and not giant company X that I'm dealing with, I will be more open to that because I would be pretty trusting of that.
It's
As
more
opposed to
neutral.
yeah, exactly. And so I think that there's a lot of potential to improve people's understandings about arbitration because again, there have been all these exposés about, oh, the world of arbitration, it's all stacked against you and all in favor of the big company, but it doesn't have to be that way, assuming it was that way to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, amen, sister. I mean, yeah, stay tuned. Yeah.
Yeah, stay tuned indeed. David, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Always great to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget, Zach. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, David, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for giving us all of your thoughtfulness and time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the AAAi podcast. Please consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite podcasting platform. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so that you never miss an episode.